Okay, let's get straight into the book. The book of 2 Peter is a 3-chapter book. And you contrast that with 1 Peter, which has 5 chapters in it. The book of 1 Peter looks at the persecution of the church from the outside. In that writing, the Apostle Peter concentrates on informing the believers about persecution and how they ought to stand during the time of persecution. And he gives them the example of Jesus, how he stood during the time of persecution, and is asking them basically to do the same thing. Because one of the things that we are promised is that we will be persecuted for Christ's sake. So that persecution was coming from the outside. That's 1 Peter. But in the book of 2 Peter, the persecution is coming from within the church. And we're going to see that in a moment. That reminds me of 3 other people in the scriptures that we know when they have trouble from the outside, and also they have trouble from the inside. Can you think about anyone? Do you remember Nehemiah? Nehemiah was the one who built the wall of Jerusalem. At the time that he was building the wall, remember in chapter 6 that Tobiah and Sanballat, they came to him and said, "Let us meet in the plain of Ono." And he replied to them that, "I'm carrying out a great work. I'm not going to leave my work and go meet with you in the plain of Ono, so I'm not coming." That was persecution from the outside. In the same chapter, he was called by Shemaiah and the prophetess Noadiah, and they called him and said, "You know what? Come and hide in this temple." And he said, "Can a man like me hide?" And he ended up asking God and reporting them to God and saying, "God, remember the prophetess Noadiah and all the other prophets that are really speaking against him." That was persecution from the inside. Tobiah and Sanballat were persecuting him from the outside, then he was being persecuted from the inside by the other prophets. What about David? David, you know, was being chased all over the place by Saul, but then he also had problems inside his camp. Remember that Joab killed Amasa and Joab also killed Abner. Those were 2 major commanders of the army that he killed. And David was saying that these sons of Zeruiah, they're too much for me, because he was also experiencing a kind of persecution from within his camp. What about our Lord Jesus? He experienced persecution from the outside, meaning through the Pharisees and the Sadducees and teachers of the law, but also he had a Judas within his camp. Sometimes life feels like that. You get persecuted at work, or you're having some major difficulty at work, then you come home, and home sometimes is no better because you're also being persecuted from within. That kind of reminds us about the book of 2 Peter. So let's look at the central messages that the writer was endeavoring to communicate to the believers. In chapter 1, is really talking about the believers and their growth action. What action they need to take to ensure they can withstand persecution from within. And then in chapter 2, it focuses on where that persecution is going to be coming from. Well, it's going to be coming from false teachers in the same way that it came from false prophets in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, is going to come from false teachers. And we see that happening already today. And then in chapter 3, he looks at the believers and the end times. Who are you supposed to be? As the earth as we know it draws to a close, what kind of people ought you to be? We're going to go back to chapter 1 and look at what Peter had to say to us about the believer and their growth action. Talk to you soon.